Join host Bob Beatty and Mark Peterson as they discuss campaign issues with Libertarian Steve Rosile, Republican incumbent Senator Pat Roberts, and George Cook of the Reform Party, the three candidates for United States Senator from Kansas, tonight at 7 on KTWU Channel 11.
Next time on ExxonMobil Masterpiece Theater's The Forsyte Saga.
I'll introduce you. Mr. and Mrs. Baines. Meet the man who killed your nephew.
You brought me laughter and joy, and instead of feeling satisfied, you made me hungry for more.
You have given me much more than I have ever given you.
Then stay.
Tonight at 8 on KTWU.
Next time on Frontier House.
It was so great having my father and my brother here leading up to the wedding.
They're just pulling out all the stops to get a house and a roof up.
This is a great wedding gift. Last gift of my bachelor life.
It is really fun getting all pretty and putting on pretty clothes and getting clean. This is so great to have a special day like this.
Tonight at 9 on KTWU.
Support for KTWU's educational partnership with the Topeka Public Schools using Between the Lions and Arthur is provided by the Topeka School Fund. Serving viewers in Kansas and Missouri, this is KTWU Channel 11 Topeka and K30AL Channel 30 Iola Fort Scott Chanute.
This is Election 02, the U.S. Senate. Tonight's guests are Republican incumbent Senator Pat Roberts, Libertarian candidate Steve Rosile, and the Reform Party candidate George Cook. And your host from the Washburn University Political Science Department, Bob Beatty, and from KPR Radio news reporter Peter Hancock.
Greetings and welcome to Election 2002, a series of special programs brought to you by KTWU. The purpose of these programs is to provide you, the viewer, with what we hope is a broader and deeper understanding of the positions of the candidates for the major offices on the ballot this November 5th. Today's program focuses on the race for the United States Senate, and we have here with us two of the candidates vying for that seat, George Cook from the Reform Party and Stephen Rosile from the Libertarian Party. Senator Pat Roberts was scheduled to appear on the show, but we were informed he wouldn't be able to participate due to another commitment. I'm Bob Beatty, your co-host, and I'm joined by Peter Hancock. I'm a faculty member of the Political Science Department of Washburn University, and Mr. Hancock is a correspondent for Kansas Public Radio. Before we begin, I would like to express the deepest condolences to the family and friends of Senator Paul Wellstone, who died along with his wife and daughter in a plane crash Friday morning. I was fortunate to know Paul Wellstone as he was a professor of political science at Carleton College during the 4 years I was a student there. Senator Wellstone exemplified many of the traits we so often look for in our leaders. He was passionate about justice. He was honest to a fault. He was compassionate for those in our society who need a little help. And above all, he believed always that the good fight was always worth it, whatever the outcome. And let's move on to our forum. Peter, you wanted to ask the first question of George Cook.
Okay. I guess we have a unique opportunity today to just talk about third-party movements in Kansas and third-party movements in the United States and where you think how those contribute to the political process. So we'll start with Mr. Cook. Your party, the Reform Party, I believe started in 1992 with Ross Perot and went into some turmoil as soon as Ross Perot stopped being the candidate, leading some people to wonder whether or not this really is a party or was it just a personality cult built up around Mr. Perot. What is the Reform Party today, and what does it stand for? What would you do as a Reform office holder, senator, if you're elected to the Senate?
It's quite a good question. What is the Reform Party? A lot of people have asked me that out on the campaign trail. The Reform Party is a pro-life, pro-Constitution, pro-Second Amendment, smaller government, lower taxes, fair trade group that believes in providing a government that is responsive and responsible to the people. So we work very difficult situations to bring forth the issues, discuss them, and bring solutions to those issues. The Reform Party is growing quite rapidly here in Kansas. We've watched our growth of about 2% in the last year. We've also managed to fill the full slate of candidates whereas other parties have had struggles with getting candidates out there.
And what about the Libertarian Party and your candidacy?
Well, the Libertarian Party National was formed in December 1971 in Colorado Springs by David Nolan and Carl Hess and other disaffected young Republicans and young Americans for freedom. And the state party was formed in around 1972, just shortly thereafter, the Kansas Party. And we believe that the freedom of the individual is the best way to ensure that our country goes forward and is prosperous and remains free. We are focused on the absolute maximum liberty for the individual, free and open markets. We don't like coercion. We believe that everybody owns themselves, the fruits of their own labors, and that they should vote their wealth in the marketplace and not have goods and services delivered by government, because that distorts the marketplace. Many of the problems we have in education, health care, pension plans, and dozens of others all come because markets are distorted by government interference.
Mr. Cook, before we began taping, you were complaining a bit about that Senator Roberts wasn't really campaigning. Would you like to comment on that complaint you made?
Well, I've been out and about all down the campaign trail, everywhere from Wichita out as far southwest as Moscow, Kansas, Salina, Hutchinson, Baldwin City, Junction City, Topeka several times. Going to Fort Scott on Tuesday, back in Topeka on Monday. Been here, been to Leavenworth, Council Grove. In fact, in Leavenworth, he was invited to a public televised forum, and he refused to appear. Everywhere I've gone, I've looked around to try to find Pat Roberts or his representative and ask him when they were going to debate. I found his staff at the Hutchinson Fair, the state fair in Hutchinson. And they said, well, he's planning to do that any time. Yet we have no response. We have an offer for a debate provided by the Wichita 12 at Wichita State on Friday the 1st at 1 to 3 p.m. Mr. Roberts still has yet to reply to Mary Dean, who is the head, while Mr. Rosile and myself are ready, willing, and eager to debate the issues and give the public an informed view of all the candidates so that they can make up their own mind and be represented by the person they choose.
Would you say your candidacy is trying to unseat Senator Roberts or more promoting a Libertarian Party in that sense?
Well, my candidacy is to help ensure that the Libertarian Party remains ballot qualified in Kansas and to give a libertarian alternative to more of the status quo from entrenched government bureaucracies and politicians, and to publicize the party and grow the party. We have over 300 current elected office holders around the country with over 200 appointed. We're going to win more this election coming November 5th. We're going to win more next year and the year after. And we have had an impact on the debate and on policies and politics in Washington. And we will have a bigger debate as time goes by and more of our candidates take office.
Okay. Mr. Cook, if you are elected senator, you'll be in a Senate that's almost evenly divided between Republicans and Democrats. I think one question on the minds of a lot of people is if they took the risk and elected a third-party candidate to an institution like the U.S. Senate, that the voice of Kansas would effectively be locked out because a third-party candidate can't work within the Democratic and Republican structures. Why should Kansans take a risk, and how would you work within the existing structure in Washington?
You know, I heard the same question when I was at Leavenworth in Lansing, and it's a simple, straightforward answer. As a third-party candidate, you do not have to vote the party lines. And in such a tightly controlled area where every vote matters so much, they would have to seek out my vote to get legislation passed. They would have to convince me of the arguments. On the other hand, I am the voice of the people of Kansas. Therefore, I would argue the issues directly to these people. I would go seek out the other senators in their chambers. I would voice out adamantly and vehemently the things that Kansas believes in, our values and our traditions, and make sure that we had equal representation. Okay, I would also go to the congressman and say, you need to be back here talking about these things with the people and getting their voice heard. We need to put forward the issues that Kansans want.
That's an issue, a sword that cuts both ways. I mean, you don't owe any allegiance to the party apparatus of the Republicans or the Democrats, and they owe no allegiance to you. So if you have a proposal that you would like to see pushed through the Senate and pushed through Congress, nobody else in that chamber has any reason necessarily to support you.
But they do. But they do, because they owe their allegiance to the people that voted them in. And that's what you argue. You argue to them. You were paid for by the people who you're representing. They pay your salary. This is what they're wanting. And you put forth the issue. You do not argue your personal belief. You argue the belief of the state. And you convince them of what is right and what is wrong.
Mr. Rosile?
Well, actually, third-party office holders can have a greater influence than their numbers because they can act as a conscience. They can say things that office holders from the major parties can't, because there is a lot of control from the party apparatus of office holders both in Washington and in the state houses. However, there is already a group in the Congress of over 20 congressmen, the Liberty Committee.org. TheLibertyCommittee.org, you'll find it's chaired by Congressman Ron Paul, who was our presidential candidate in 1988. It has over 20 Republicans and 1 independent, and it's growing all the time. And basically, while most of them are Republicans, they are libertarians. They have introduced legislation to abolish the Federal Reserve, to remove us from the United Nations, to make sure our troops are never placed under foreign control. These are issues libertarians champion, and we already have over 20 in the Congress just by other labels. And libertarians don't care so much about labels as working for liberty. We're willing to work for freedom with any group or individual, anywhere, anytime.
Mr. Cook, let me throw off some quick statistics. Presidential years voting turnout is usually around 50%. Non-presidential years as low as 30, around the 30%. In the Kansas House, for example, over 50 seats will go unopposed. The last presidential election, we're still not sure who won. Is democracy okay in the United States, or is there actually a trend where we should maybe start worrying about some of these things?
Democracy has been under attack for many years. We are a republic, which means we have elected representatives. And the people generally get apathetic because they don't feel that their voice matters, that they're going to be heard, or that their vote counts. And we noticed that in the 2000 presidential election in Florida. Well, this is how my whole campaign got started. In 2000, after that, I started discussing things with my coworkers. And I said, we need electoral reform. We can take the Electoral College and bring it up to date by taking the current slate of electors that we have to elect and abolishing that and make it the people we already have there. We already have 4 congressmen in Kansas and 2 senators. Well, those congressmen are already tied to their district. Now they can vote according to the popular vote of their district, and they have to answer to the people of Kansas. Those 2 senators, in turn, would have to vote according to statewide because they represent statewide. Now you can split the states effectively to have their voice heard evenly. Not only does the voice of California and Florida, Texas, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, Ohio, the bigger states matter, but now they have to seek every vote because every vote can go any direction. That equalizes it.
Is democracy in trouble, or are we doing fine in the United States?
Well, this is a republic, as George just said. I really don't support democracy. This is a constitutional republic with limited powers granted government, and those are the only powers there's to exercise. And our federal government is all over the map and all over the world, spending taxpayer monies on all kinds of programs that have no basis in the Constitution whatsoever. And this has to cease. This has to cease because this country can't afford it. We're paying nearly 50% of our earnings to taxes to fund government at all levels, with the bulk of that going to the federal government. The federal government makes the states pay dollars and then turn around and sit up and beg for pennies.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again? 50%?
Nearly 50% of a working person's earnings are taxed by all levels of government to support their activities. Nearly 50%.
I'm sorry, but I have a very hard time believing that. figure. And I look at my
Let's
income
see.
and how much I dispose and
I
how
was
much I pay in taxes, and it's not 50%.
Taking public administration 10 years ago at Wichita State University, and the book said 40 to 45% at that time. That was 10 years ago. Do you realize that if the federal government was no larger than it was 10 years ago, we could abolish the income tax and wouldn't even miss it? That's 50% growth in their budget in the last 10 years. The Republicans have held office, have controlled both houses of Congress for 6 of those 10 years. The party that's supposed to be of small, limited government. Government has grown outrageously the past decade. And the Republicans talk a game, but they don't deliver it. Well, they spend more and more of our money and work with the Democrats to take more and more of our rights continuously, and this has to stop.
Well, I will say that the research by Dr. Peterson at Washburn shows about 23 cents on the dollar for a Kansas middle class.
Well, I don't know, because I'm losing 12% in Social Security.
That's everything.
I'm using 12% to Social Security. I'm losing 17% to the government. There's 29% right
of your
there.
Taxable income, not of your total income.
No, my total income. By the time we get done,
well,
between Social Security, federal income tax, state income tax, and then you throw in the sales taxes we have, like the 34.9 cents we spend on gasoline, that's supposed to go to our highways, and where is it going? Does anyone actually know? Can you actually show me where that 34.9 cents came in and where it's being spent? It's being hidden in the budget.
And people can go debate these statistics. Let me ask you a question. If there's 30 to 40 million uninsured Americans regarding health care, does the government have a role to try to address that, or is that sort of, well, that's just sort of the way it is? Mr. Cook.
Well, there's 2 ways to address that real simply.
Okay.
Number 1, insurance groups. You get small groups, they don't have the buying power. They don't have the bulk voice. The one person standing up saying, I represent 30,000 people. You're going to give me a better deal. We can take and redefine the group issue and say, this employer, and this employer, you can come together and form a limited group to provide insurance coverage. Now you've got bulk buying power to provide better options.
Should the government be involved in that?
Just by providing that as an option, allowing these people to form together. When they do, now you have a bigger voice. They have to listen. You have more buying power, just like Walmart gets better prices by having bulk buying power. It's the same thing with insurance. More people together to buy gets you a better deal. You can get a better option. You can say, okay, I need this part of the coverage or that part of the coverage. And the people that would represent the group would be those people who are in charge of those businesses. They would be the voice. They would come back to their people and say, here's the options we have. You get to choose. We've managed to come together, form a group that can help buy the insurance. The other thing that the government can do is real simple, by providing more incentives to the businesses, tax breaks, tax cuts, to provide that insurance coverage to the people.
We have too much government in health care. In fact, the mess in health care right now is due to that government interference. It actually began during World War II, when wages were frozen, but large employers could offer health benefits and it wouldn't be taxed as income to the worker. And then in the 60s, we had Medicare and Medicaid. I have it on good authority from physicians I know personally that elderly and other groups are paying as much or more for health care today as they were in the 60s. It hasn't saved them any money. In fact, all the requirements of the FDA and reimbursement for health care providers that the government puts on health care providers and the health care system is what has driven the costs up. More government is not the answer. We don't need permission from our government to come together as groups or to negotiate with health care insurers. We don't need government involvement there. We need the free markets to work. We need the person buying the health care for himself and his family to spend his dollars, his own dollars. You know, we promote things like medical savings accounts. You would buy catastrophic health insurance for yourself and or your family, but up to several $1,000s, depending on if it's an individual or a family, that could be put into a tax-free account. You spend that money as if it was yours, and if there's some left over at the end of the year, you roll it over to the next year. Get government out of it. Government does nothing but distort markets, increase prices, and reduce the quality of services, whether it's health care, education, pension plans, or anything. The government, if they just do their constitutional functions, have all they can do. But they go all over the map, waste their time and our money, and it has to stop, and it has to stop soon.
Okay. I'd like to take a stab at a foreign policy question, because I think both of you, when talking about your philosophies of your parties, touched on some foreign policy issues. As the United States prepares or contemplates a war with Iraq, poll after poll has shown that the overwhelming majority of Americans believe this should only be done as part of a multinational force, and a somewhat smaller majority, but a majority nonetheless, I think 54%, say that it should only be done with the backing of the United Nations. And Mr. Rosile, you're in favor of getting rid of the United Nations. Does this not sort of demonstrate that the Libertarian Party is far outside the mainstream of American political thought?
No, I don't think that indicates that at all. In fact, I do support the United Nations as a place where countries can come together and work out their differences peaceably. I do not support the United Nations as a prototypical one-world government. I do not support the United Nations when it goes into sovereign nations that aren't attacking others. 10 years ago, Iraq invaded Kuwait. We and many other nations around the country responded to that. We recently chased a terrorist group into Afghanistan, where it was operating out of. I think it was perfectly clear that that wasn't a war against Afghanistan per se, but the Al-Qaeda terrorist network and the ruling group in Afghanistan that supported that terrorist group. But to invade Iraq now with no evidence, with them not attacking any other country, with them unable to attack the United States, I don't think it's for us to do. I don't even think it's for the UN to do, unless there's pretty darn good proof on the table in front of everybody that they have or are about to have nuclear weapons or other serious weapons of mass destruction. I don't think that's been demonstrated to the American people. 10 years ago, then President Bush said in Kuwait that the Iraq army came in and threw babies out of incubators to send the incubators into Iraq. That was a lie. That was concocted by a public relations company in New York City. And the President of the United States, who should have known better, got on public television and told the American people a lie. How many more lies is the current President Bush telling people?
Mr. Cook, United Nations, does it serve a role in the international community? Should the United States continue to be part of it? And should we base our foreign policy to any extent on the will of the community of nations?
Well, when you look at the United Nations, it came originally from the League of Nations that Woodrow Wilson put together. It was a way to bring forth the problems that each country had with another and discuss them and come to a peaceable resolution. Okay. Now, we had a good usage of this in Korea, where we supported an invasion. We had a good usage in Kuwait, where we formed a coalition. Everybody came together because we were working for the greater good. But we came together as independent countries supporting one cause. The same thing can be done with Iraq. If you can prove the case that we are immediately threatened, then we need to form a coalition, not just us. We need the British, the French, the Germans, the Italians, the Turkish, the Russians. There is not a nation on the earth that we don't need, including the Iraqis. The Kurds have been bombed and gassed to death by their own leader, Saddam Hussein. Why are we allowing this to happen? Because we don't adamantly worry about that. We worry about oil. It's about oil in the Middle East. There is just as much violence and travesty in Africa as there is in the Middle East. So this isn't about taking care of terrorism. If he could prove the case by getting those weapons inspectors back in there and to give us current information so that we don't go in there blindly and get our troops just massacred, because they could set up an ambush. Okay, we give them our tactics over the air. They know what's going to happen before we get there. They could set an ambush.
More generally, though, on the subject of the United Nations and of American either supremacy in the world or at least independence in terms of its foreign policy, should there be law among nations, and should there be an organization bigger than any one nation to enforce that law?
No, we have to maintain the sovereignty of the United States, because our government is representing us. And do we elect anybody to go represent us in the United Nations? No. Until we have an elected representative that represents the entire United States, there is no reason for the United Nations to dictate to us. Now, we should use that as a means to resolve things peacefully, and if we cannot, to form a coalition to take care of it militarily.
Mr. Rosile, the United States foreign aid budget per capita ranks 18th or 19th of the 20 industrialized democracies. Should we increase it, get rid of it, keep it where it is?
Abolish it. Abolish it. All foreign aid should be done by the voluntary contributions of individuals and groups in this country. There's no authorization in the United States Constitution for any foreign aid for foreign countries to come from the United States taxpayer. There's no authorization whatsoever. This should only be done, whether it's military or humanitarian aid, it should only come from voluntary contributions, just like all charities should. Voluntary contributions, not forced taxation from government.
Isn't it a part of foreign policy, foreign aid? Which, of course, you know, voluntary associations aren't really part of foreign policy.
And friends to all, entangling alliances with none. That is how some of the framers of our Constitution put it, including George Washington. Friends to all, entangling alliances with none.
Do you think Mr. Washington foresaw nuclear weapons and the Cold War and those sorts of things?
I don't think our Constitution was designed for a free people to remain free, and the principles of free government do not change with technologies change.
I think most historians and analysts today would agree that the Marshall Plan at the end of World War II prevented the economic and social collapse of Western Europe and the possible falling of that continent into the hands of the communists, and preserved world stability for many decades afterwards. Is it your contention that, say, if you had been in the Senate after World War II, would you have not voted for the Marshall Plan?
I probably would, because I think private businesses and industry could have rebuilt Western Europe. Could have and would have.
Western Europe had no industry at the end of World
No,
War
but
II.
South America did, the United States did, Canada did, Asian nations did. Private industry, if government stays out of the way, can do amazing things, and could have rebuilt, could have and would have built Western Europe. Western Europeans are very industrious people. That same amount of help could have come through voluntary efforts in this country and around the world. Could have and should have.
Mr. Cook, foreign aid?
Well, we can look at our current pluses, like when Russia went bankrupt and the Soviet Union collapsed. We got McDonald's in there. We provided incentives to get them in there and show them free enterprise, capitalism, and how it can benefit their society. The same thing with the Marshall Plan. We gave them a chance to rebuild so that they wouldn't be hostile to us and resentful of what had happened. We can do the same thing here. Provide the leadership, guidance, and assistance where necessary, but do not send our tax dollars. If you're wanting to send our money, then you need approval from the people. Instead, take that money, buy clothing, buy food, buy medical supplies, let them have that to distribute. We could use the American Red Cross, Amnesty International, many other organizations that could be our ambassador for peace.
Okay, we have 1
prosperity.
minute. Mr. Rosile, the first thing you'll do when you get into the U.S. Senate?
The first thing I would do would introduce a bill to abolish the IRS and the personal income tax. This would free up untold amount of money for the U.S. consumer to provide for themselves and their families. It would spur the economy like nothing we've seen in the last 100 years. And it would go a long way to making this country a much fairer and freer place to live. Abolish the IRS.
Mr. Cook?
My first thing would be to repeal NAFTA. NAFTA has been an unfair, unconstitutional trade agreement that was never ratified by the Senate. It was only approved under fast track, which was abdication of Senate control and checks and balances.
Okay, thank you
so
very
we
much.
need to repeal it and bring back our free trade, bring back economic prosperity, bring home the jobs.
Thank you for joining us for this, the fifth in a series of programs dedicated to the notion that an informed electorate makes wise choices. We sincerely hope you'll be making your wise choice on November 5th. Goodbye.
Next time on ExxonMobil Masterpiece Theater's The Forsyte Saga.
I'll introduce you. Mr. and Mrs. Baines. Meet the man who killed your nephew.
You brought me laughter